Hi, welcome to episode 20 of Seize the Moment podcast. And today we're going to talk to you about...
We're going to talk to you guys about the difference between self-acceptance and growth, essentially sort of change, right? And self-enhancement or self-actualization, whatever term you guys want to use. So, wait, Alan, you're like out of the shot completely. So let's get you in a little bit closer.
Okay. Here I am.
There we go, much better. So in terms of so in terms of self-acceptance, right, and self-actualization, so most of our show is focused on obviously growth, right, and sort of becoming the best possible version of yourself. And so, I keep having like these issues with my own self, right, not only just kind of as a therapist, like with my clients, but just with me internally, trying to figure out what to throw away and what to keep, right, which parts of myself am I supposed to work on and improve, and which parts of myself am I essentially just supposed to accept, right, whether they're sort of unchangeable or whether maybe it's not kind of worth changing them. But like kind of my internal struggle, right, has been sort of where do I find a balance between growth and obviously, kind of self-acceptance, right, sort of liking and or maybe even loving myself for who I am. So do you ever struggle with that?
Well, one, I definitely 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Thing is, I would also, just to tag what you're talking about, I would say that the best way to grow is to accept where you're currently at. I mean, you can grow not having accepted where you are. I'm sure there's many cases of that. But yeah, I noticed that if you accept whatever your limitations are, or whatever your perceived limitations are, that's the only time that you can transcend them. Yeah, because see, what might happen in another person's case, say they don't accept their limitations, they would just be fighting against it, resisting it, kind of adding more of an energetic charge, so to speak, to that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, by fighting against these perceived limitations or these things about yourself that let's say you can't accept, it's kind of taking away resources, like mental resources, from trying to be able to try some kind of new behavior or a new belief or a new way to perceive things.
Yeah.
So to go back to your question, in my case, let's see. Yeah, there have been times when I would think, for instance, I would never be able to, what's a good word? I wouldn't be able to become non-reactive. You may have heard of the popular book Power of Now. No, but right. So what happened is, like, when I read that book, one of the key principles that they try to teach there, that the author tries to teach, is this principle of non-resistance, non-reactiveness, meaning to allow things to be. Also acceptance, which actually works. That ties in. And the thing is, when I found it I like the idea of it. I thought it was attractive. I figured, whoa, wouldn't that be cool if everything that occurred, I would be able to not resist it, and then just take action based on the circumstances without necessarily adding resistance to it, adding extra thought, anything along those lines. But in practice, even though I did have a tremendous change after reading that book and kind of internalizing what it is that they were trying to teach, I wasn't perfect at it. And I would argue nobody is. But the thing is, I realized that, for example, in relationships, even though I had read Power of Now, I still had jealousy occur. This is in my younger years, but I did have jealousy occur and things along those lines. And even though on a logical level and also on the level of like almost intuition, I understood that I should not necessarily be reacting the way I was. I noticed I couldn't, at the time, allow myself to feel jealous and just kind of and just kind of let that be, if that makes any sense.
Just mindfully, right? Sort of just look at it non-judgmentally and just allow it to come and go.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Of course, I still felt the jealousy, but the thing is to allow it to come and go, as you say, or to be without kind of adding any extra mental dialogue or kind of spinning around a story around it. at least by the time it goes, I wouldn't have. I did just say this, but I wouldn't have added anything to it. I would have at least maybe at some point later been able to kind of come to my senses.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so, I mean, like, I haven't read The Power of Now, right? So I can't really comment too much on it. But the thing that I really kind of, as I was thinking about the topic and what I really wanted to talk about today was, and just then this actually, you're smiling, but it's actually not going to be about The Power of Now. So, because I really don't actually have that much to say about it. But what I do have to say is about the self-help industry as a whole, that it feels like a lot of times what their billing is, right? Or kind of what their main, what would you call it? Like their main sort of area of promotion is literally self-enhancement, right? Sort of how do you become a better person? And it's sort of become cult-like, right? And sometimes when people even come to therapy, right, their main goal is essentially like, okay, I want to become a better person. But then also for me, my thing is like it has to come within limits. And so as I was struggling with this myself, right? Because so like a while ago, as obviously I don't know if you know or not, but like I was like, I loved self-help stuff, right? Like not particularly would you call it? Yeah, it's still, no, it's self-help, I would put it. So even if it's like psychology, philosophy, it's still self-help because it was geared more toward like how do you use these techniques to become better in some way.
Right.
And so for me, it literally turned into perfectionism. And so what I find is that for people who are obsessed with self-enhancement, right, who don't sort of view it as a balance or on balance with self-acceptance, what happens is one of three things. So you either become a grandiose narcissist and you're just in complete denial of your flaws. You pretty much become a perfectionist, right, and you become obsessed with just becoming a better person. Or you give up altogether and say, you know what, this is hopeless and I'll never become the person I am. I'm a terrible human being. This is awful and everything sucks. And so for me, unfortunately, I went through all three of these stages. And so, yeah.
I can definitely relate. I'll talk about it more after you continue with
Okay, I definitely want to.
I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah. So, and it's so interesting. So, because when it comes to those three stages, I feel like when it comes to, let's say, perfectionism, right? When it comes to perfectionism, you think to yourself, like, if I can just reach this sort of pinnacle, right? And this is all connected to self-help. If I could just reach this pinnacle of self-enhancement, right, then all of a sudden I'll be, happy with myself. So at one end of the spectrum, I'm pretty miserable, right? Because I'm like, ooh, I'm not where I want to be. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I'm happy because I am the perfect person, whatever that even is. And so what I found, at least from my personal experience, is there wasn't much nuance. So you know how like people, sometimes can really enjoy where they are, like you said before, kind of know that they're growing and accept that they are where they are in the process. I wasn't able to do that. So why this topic was so important to me was because I really had to figure out for myself what it means to self-accept, right, as opposed to what it means to grow. Because I feel like for me, right, and I don't even want to say the word I feel like because I believe this to be true from my own experience and from the people I know, the people who are obsessed with growth, they essentially become stuck in this pattern of here's this thing that I want to be, here's me not living up to it, and then here's this thing I want to be, and then here's me not living up to it, right? So it's sort of this cycle that kind of perpetuates itself. And then so for me, right, when I was stuck on each of those in each of those phases, that when it came to kind of the narcissistic phase, essentially everybody hated me, right? Because I was like, oh, I'm so wonderful and look at how much I've grown. And I was just completely sort of blind to like my weaknesses. And then obviously when I felt hopeless, I felt like, oh man, like life sucks, right? Nothing good is ever going to happen for me, right? There's no way I'm ever going to change myself. There's no way I'll ever be good, right? Because that's the way I get and conceptualize in a very black and white terms. And then when it comes to the other part, right, when I was sort of a perfectionist, there was this part of me that like was so driven and so obsessed with becoming the perfect person that I actually completely cut off everybody in my life, or most people.
Can I do this for you?
Why, you did the same thing? I want to hear your story.
It's something similar.
Shoot.
So, okay. So first of all, let's go to the grandiose part.
Yeah.
So what happened is there was some self-help material that I digested about, in general, having to do with self-esteem and confidence, core confidence, things along those nature. That nature, rather. Yep. And on many levels, I did have many epiphanies. But what happened is in practice, when I was trying out a whole bunch of new behaviors for me, I would be, you could say, overly confident. Here's the thing. It's not all black and white. There were many times, and I'm sure for you, you might agree with this, that you were very lucid about your state of mind. Just maybe briefly, you go in and out. And then maybe and for longer, you'd stay in either a grandiose phase, perfectionist phase, or despair phase. So I went through the grandiose thing, and that was interesting because it was I think it's good to be polarizing, actually, because then at least people will care about what you're saying. Even if they dislike what you're saying, it's still emotion that's towards you, which at any point could be flipped, but that's a different conversation. But my behavior was very polarizing in the sense that there were some people who, if they liked me, they really liked me. And if they disliked that behavior, they really disliked it.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, though. I think that still actually... I think that still happens, actually, if you're being authentic. I think that, you have to let the chips fall where they may with your personality. And people who will like you, and people who dislike you will dislike you. So it's actually very similar, the result of it. But my behavior was, I had this grandiose sense of self. I was like... for instance, let's say when I was learning about Power of Now, not just Power of Now, in general, let's say my Asian religions class in college, learning a lot about Buddha, Hindu religions, a bunch of religions, Eastern philosophy, things like that. And so a lot of them would talk about the concept of enlightenment, right? And so when I was quote-unquote present, and I didn't see this at the time, but when I was quote-unquote present, I would then think, oh, I'm enlightened now, right? Because you would think that if you are fully present in the moment, you can argue that's what enlightenment is about. So enlightenment, I don't like the word enlightenment. This is very brief. Enlightenment, here's the thing. It doesn't describe accurately what's happening when you're in the moment. It's kind of, because the moment is constantly changing, or reality is in flux. So I think there should be a word that's more like a verb that maybe describes what's going on with that state. Yeah. But it's not like something you achieve. Like, I am enlightened now. Okay, and then what about the next second? Right. But but anyway. Right. So I would experience times when I thought I was enlightened. Grandiose. Okay. Then perfectionist. Right. And this is where I could relate to not necessarily, I didn't cut people off exactly. But because my behavior from that grandiose phase, it's actually chronological, which is hilarious. So it went from grandiose to perfectionist. And because my behavior wasn't matching, or how I felt wasn't matching to that first phase of having this grandiose sense of self, until I felt close or exactly as I did in that first stage, I wouldn't want to interact with people because I felt like I wasn't offering the same kind of value.
In the second stage?
In the perfectionist stage. I felt like until I had this down correctly, just being in the moment and not resisting what's happening, and also being kind of calm around people and stuff like that, I couldn't even be around them because I'd be giving off a bad emotion.
Right, very
I wanted to say
white.
Vibe.
We see very black and white, right? Same thing I had.
Yeah, and then of course I did have moments of lucidity. I did see what I was doing. There were moments when I did become present through that process. Engaged in the moment. I feel bad sometimes saying the word present because maybe someone who's watching in the audience, because they're not familiar with the vernacular, or rather say a whole bunch of different ways of saying it. So, I would then, there's people I wouldn't talk to. It was also, then when I got to the despair stage, where it's like, oh wow, like it's really not changing. I also felt like it was kind of going down. And actually, what I didn't realize at the time was kind of like that identity was collapsing. And I just kept resisting its collapse, thinking I can put a Band-Aid over it and get back to the first stage. I didn't realize that I just kind of had to let them, go through the motions, and it would have probably have been done faster. But when I got to that despair stage, I actually really didn't talk to a lot of people until I got all my ducks in a row, let's say. Gotcha. Not the healthiest solution. Actually, what I realized is, paradoxically, even though, yes, I can understand that it's, from one level, it sounds considerate to not want to infect people with a bad vibe, so to speak. but also from not talking to people and friends and all that. Even though it is kind of normal to nowadays for people to let a bunch of time pass between talking to friends, because we've just gotten more busier as we've gotten older and stuff. Even though that was the case, it was kind of like I was behaving selfishly by not talking to them. So I didn't realize I was coming from that selfish paradigm. I thought I was being selfless because I don't want to infect people with a toxic, bad vibe. But what I realized is, if I actually did interact with friends, that might have actually sped up my ability to kind of accept where I'm at. Especially, and it's not just any friends. Good friends, positive people. Because again, and we've said this before, the people who are closest to you, I've heard it's the 5 people who are the closest to you kind of make up what your personality is. So if somebody is coming from a low place, it is good to surround themselves with good people. I was lucky enough to eventually kind of come out of it. I saw what was going on logically. It just took me a while to even while realizing what was going on, it took me a while to kind of gain momentum and kind of make steps out of that stage. I was able to do it, but it was a very slow process, even intellectually understanding what was going on. But it was possible, which was good.
Well, good for you. I mean, mine was a little bit more selfish. So for me, when I was in the perfectionist stage, I really just wanted to become the narcissistic image that I had. So I was just like, oh, I'm actually not that smart. So now, rather than spend time with all of these people, what I want to do is I just want to spend all of this time learning. So it was sort of like, have you ever heard the story of Faust?
Yes, but can you?
Sure. So it's so there's pretty much this kind of brilliant figure, right? Who's sort of what was it? So he's like enticed by the devil, right? So the devil sort of gives him I don't remember exactly what it was. I think it was he pretty much gives him like he says like, look, if you want, like, I'll give you this sort of power, right? So for your soul, right? So essentially, if you give me your soul, I'll give you pretty much all of the knowledge of the world, right? And sort of Faust becomes obsessed with intelligence and with learning, right? So, or rather, not intelligence. It's a bad word for it, but he pretty much becomes obsessed with the pursuit of knowledge. So that's pretty much where I was at that point. So for me, like, there was nothing more important than knowledge. So it was a lust after it, where I was like, oh my god, like, I have to be like one of the it's fucking embarrassing, but I was like, I have to like be one of the smartest people ever. Like, that was so important to me at the time, and I really didn't even consider what I was giving up, because for me, like, that was the only thing that made being a human being worthwhile. Like, the more you know, pretty much, the better you are as a person. And I mean, this wasn't just kind of my idea. This is something that was sort of, from my family background. Like, an uncle of mine was like, yeah, this is the only thing that really matters in life. And kind of when I was more impressionable, I was like, oh, like, this is what a person is supposed to become. So there was a point in my life where I pretty much just neglected, if not completely rejected, all of the people in my life. And I was like, oh, you know what? I want to spend all of my life sort of on intelligence, intellect, whatever, on becoming a smarter person. So then, obviously, after some time, I realized, oh shit, I have like severe limitations in my knowledge. And there are things that I'll probably never know, right? And here's the thing, right? Now, I can tell you, rationally speaking, like, I get it. There are plenty of experts in the field, right, who accept that they're not going to be experts outside of their narrow domains of expertise. Great. Me at that point was like, I want to just know and understand everything. So I went into these different fields that I had no business in, right? Even like quantum physics, right? Sort of extreme molecular biology. This is like really just deep concepts, right? Of things that I maybe understood this much. And I was like, no, I have to understand everything, right? Can you imagine that? Like me, who has like no like actual scientific educational background, like besides like high school or junior high or whatever. I was like, no, I need to learn these concepts. So hopefully, if I'm lucky, I learned about like 30% of them. But the point was that at the time, that's what I thought encompassed self-worth and self-esteem. That I was only worthy of sort of love and, kind of acceptance if I was the sort of genius intellect.
For the record, again, why I related to the perfectionist thing, I was literally doing that as well. It was just like, I felt like I had to gain more. It was a lot of self-help related stuff, actually. Yeah. But yeah, I dabbled. I dabbled as well. I was very... Here's the thing. Once upon a time, I found a resource, or actually multiple resources, where I could get knowledge for free. Let's put it that way. And it was just knowledge that if I asked my friends if they had access to this, they would have said no.
Yeah.
It was just like lucky. So I was like, okay, this is great, and I have all these different books I can access, videos, a whole bunch of things. And so I did actually do that. But also, on some level, I took a lot of it for granted. But that's a different story. But yeah, I tried to learn all of it, and it was fun. I'll say that. I mean, I actually was kind of cool. I mean, would you say that at least? I mean, I understand it wasn't good that you were cutting people out.
I'm obsessed, yeah.
But would you say like some of the stuff you read was cool at least?
Here's also
there was some kind of value from it.
It was, but here's also the funny thing. If I had to guess, I probably forgot like 50% of it, man. So that's what makes all of it so interesting.
I hear you.
It's like you think about this thing, right? So it's like, okay, I want to be this person who's a genius, right? Have like this brilliant intellect. But then as you go through life, right, and sort of you read more and more books, you actually forget a lot of what you read in them. And what's so interesting is my college mentor, right? So he actually is a genius. So he reads about 100 books a year. So it's so bad that he actually has to have a list. So he has like a list of all of the books he's read in a lifetime, because if you even probably go back a year, he won't even remember if he's read it or not. Where like you could give him a book and he'd be like, did I read that? Like, you know how you would be like with a movie or a TV show, but he looks at a book and says, not sure. So which is like crazy, right? So that really begs the question of what makes for a good life. So is it literally sort of, you know, kind of engulfing yourself with all of this knowledge and this information, or is it really doing something that's a bit more intimately fulfilling?
Actually, I still, well, okay, and you're of course going to agree with this. I don't, because you're not saying not to do this.
Right.
But yeah, when I realized...
Obsession, remember. I was obsessed.
There's, I noticed that if it's something, like in a particular field that you're interested in, and it's something that you particularly put into use here and there, if not often, then it actually does get internalized, and you do remember from those books you read, even if it was from a long time ago.
Yeah. So I can tell you stuff about psychology. If you ask me about quantum physics, not so much.
Yeah. No. Yeah, honestly, I remember there was this experiment where...
the double slit?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a classic. That's actually that's probably one of the few experiments that I really like deeply know.
Yeah.
Just because I read about it like 100 times. Because there's so much to it, like, and there's so many variations of it.
I heard it was that idea of there being an observer or not was debunked.
Was it?
Yeah, because they said that if an observer is present or not, that affects the measurement.
Right.
But I heard later that it like Neil deGrasse Tyson was on Rogan's show.
Right.
And he actually debunked it. I can't remember exactly what he said.
You're like blowing me away.
But once he debunked it, there was a lot of things that I had read in... See, once I saw that experiment and the results of that the first time, and the conclusions that were drawn from it, I actually then started to think, whoa, if... you being there affects the reality. What else about you being there might affect the reality? And a bunch of things from pseudoscience. Then I started to make all these little connections, and then some of those things might have slight validity if studied more based on the results of the double slit.
Interesting.
Unfortunately, I wanted it to be true.
Well, technically, according to the equations of which I know nothing about. So Werner Heisenberg once said that, like, what was it? Like the wave function collapse of it, like, when you look at the particle.
Referring to the uncertainty principle?
No, so this is different. So that's been like, okay, so there's a misconception between this and the uncertainty principle. So that's about the speed. Yeah, so that's about the velocity and the position of the particle. That's something else. So in terms of like the double slit.
I'm just laughing at my own. I was like, do I remember this? Nope.
Well, so the double slit experiment, right? So when the wave function, so remember, the wave function is pretty much just a bunch of probabilities, right? So when the wave function collapses, it's pretty much when those probabilities, whichever one, are actualized, right? When you view it. So Heisenberg said, according to the mathematics, again, of which I do not understand because I'm definitely not a mathematician. So he says you can actually place the wave function collapse at either the observer or at the actual sort of measuring stick or the measuring device. So I was like, oh, because technically, if you place it, like, mathematically speaking, if you can just say it's the measuring device that's doing it, then it's actually not the observer. But the idea was that it was open-ended, or not open-ended, it's not the right word, but it was open to interpretation, right? So a lot of people, especially kind of people toward the New Age movement, were like, oh, yes, let's take the interpretation of it's the observer. Whereas the scientists were like, no, dude, it's the device, it's not the observer. Mm-hmm. So whatever, that's a whole other subject. But the point was, and I want to talk to you about that after. So, but the point is that, like, see, and that actually proves the point, man, holy shit. Like, if you think about it, right, imagine spending spending so much time like Faust, right? Like this person who spends so much time just learning and learning and learning, only to find out that something that you held to be so sacred was bunk.
That's one, and then two, also to not be able to bring up every single detail that you might remember about it.
Yeah.
That's not exactly the case in Faust. Faust did actually,
No,
but yeah, that's the thing. Like remembering something that you're not studying constantly, only to not remember it fully, and then not be able to present it completely factually, all the facts. That's something that's actually boggled my mind for years. I actually started studying memory at one point, thinking, what the hell is going on? How come I can't remember all these things that I'd learned in school? Or why is it that when I'm by myself, if I start to think about psychology in general, and I start to think about certain, not just conditioning or operant conditioning or classical conditioning, which, why the only reason I remember that now? Because we're kind of in the midst of conversation. There's this feedback kind of going on.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm... Also, I've heard this said, usually it's easier to access memories if you're currently in the same state as you were during the time you were encoding that experience.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, when I was by myself, I couldn't remember these things. But then if I got into a conversation, for some reason, they would be able to come out.
It was like a cue.
And I just, it was so frustrating. Because then I started to think, because here's the problem with also having a self-dialogue. Say you are not in control of your relationship to your self-dialogue. It just kind of runs, and then maybe you rationalize based off that self-dialogue. So one thing I would do back in the past is when I couldn't remember certain things, I would then think, wow, I've forgotten it. And then based on me thinking I've forgotten it, another thought comes, which is, wow, I'm really forgetting things. Then I try to think about another thing. Then I'll say, I forgot that thing. Then later I'll realize I proved myself wrong in conversation with someone to get the cue or trigger, whatever.
Right, just deeper in memory.
Yeah, so that's a whole other...
Right, but
that could be like a trap.
But doesn't that kind of prove, at least in the respect of, like, let's say, I don't know, memory and intellect, that there's no such thing, obviously, as the perfect person. And so for a lot of people, they spend their time sort of becoming that, right? So in terms of even, like, self-help, right, for the most part, yes, it is about becoming a better human being more so than it is about becoming perfect in a sense. So not always, obviously, because there's sometimes, being the most successful, which is... one can link that to being the smartest, right? Somebody tries to become, let's say, highly successful. Maybe not the most, but highly successful, which obviously, I would think implies, obviously, being highly intelligent. Or
it
highly
implies it, you would think, stereotypically. But some rich people, or people, there's a lot of times they're not the most, not every one of them is the most intelligent. Yeah. Yes, some of them may have certain kind of systems and strategies for what got them the success and what continues to get them success. But to classify some of those people as intelligent or highly intelligent?
I just mean in terms of the self-help stuff. Like, what do you try to kind of grow toward, right? Because a lot of, like, I mean, I'm sure you've seen, like, the sort of Instagram kind of memes, right? Where it's like, spend, like, X amount of time, like, reading books, right? Or learning or whatever it is, right? And a lot of this is self-helpy. And I get it, right? To an extent. But so, because sometimes, with me at least, I became obsessed with that. I was like, oh, like, let's say, I don't know, this inventor, whomever, right? Spent this amount of time reading. Right, there was, I forgot who it was. So, we always bring him up. David Brooks, right? David Brooks wrote a really good article about this. And so, interestingly, this was not what I was planning on talking about today, but I think it's pretty relevant. So, there was a poet, I think it was Rilke, if I'm not mistaken.
Rilke.
Yeah, so I think it was him who he was talking about. So he said essentially this person literally spent 15, 16 hours of his entire day of his waking hours just writing and sort of like perfecting his craft. And then he had some student who was like, oh, oh, wow, you're like amazing. Can I come do this with you? And he's like, yeah, sure, kid. And so these two people pretty much had really shitty lives. Like, their like relationships were garbage, right? Both of their wives, I think, left them, if I'm not mistaken. This is off the top of my head. So I know at least one of their wives left them, or at least if they didn't, they were super unhappy. And so their interpersonal lives were garbage, but they were great at what they did. So his protege was an excellent poet, and obviously he was a legend. And so the point was that Brooks was making, he was like, look, you can become great, right? But why is that a necessity? Like, why is that good for a happy life? If you look at the bigger picture of who these people were, they actually weren't happy, right? They didn't live what one would call a satisfying life, right? And in this case, I'm conflating the terms. Technically, it's not the same thing, but for them, he said that pretty much that they weren't happy nor satisfied, right? They were actually pretty miserable, and they were always constantly working on making themselves better. And as any other writer, they were never happy with their work either. So for me, it sort of came to a point, right? And I still struggle with perfectionism today. Like, I mean, that's not something you just kind of get rid of. Mm-hmm. But the point is that there was a point where I essentially accepted that there was no way I was ever going to be this person that I wanted to be. And so why I thought this topic, again, kind of going back to our initial statement of why that topic was important, of, self-acceptance versus, not even versus, but let's say self-acceptance and growth, or and, self-actualization, was essentially because that when the person, let's say, wants to, or when a person really wants to kind of live a meaningful and fulfilling life, you can't just live towards growth. It's just, for me at least, it was definitely impossible.
Yeah, on that, that's something very important to realize. Not just because trying to focus too much on growth will take away from all these other areas of your life, and it could make you unhappy, mm-hmm. or dissatisfied, mm-hmm. which would mean non-acceptance of yourself.
Right.
But there has to be this understanding that there's, it's not just growth that occurs in life. It's not just a phase of growth. There's also a phase of decay.
Yeah.
And at least in terms of how long you're alive on this earth, right? You can only grow so much. There's a point when maybe you can build up all these skills, so you can grow those skills. Mm-hmm. But eventually they will go. It's not something that will be here forever. Since that's the case, understanding that and accepting that would definitely lead to a more happy and fulfilling life.
And that's what I mean. Like, where's this sort of that balance, right, with self-acceptance and growth? And go on.
I think that what'll happen is somebody can be interested in growth. Mm-hmm. For instance, I believe you are, and I definitely am. 100%.
I mean, we do the show.
Fair enough.
Right.
Fair enough. But even realizing that, for instance, say I'm in some kind of phase where I'm attempting to grow, mm-hmm. but I'm not successful mm-hmm. for some reason along that path.
Yeah.
If I beat myself up, that will just create a whole bunch of problems. It might affect this show, could affect my family life, my friends, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, though, even while pursuing the growth, I accept that it's okay mm-hmm. that I didn't grow or I didn't go past whatever achievement I had before.
Right, maximize your potential.
Right. Like, mm-hmm. for instance, say one of the things I'm working on, which I am, is just speaking on the podcast, not having too many ums and ahs in my statements.
Yep.
And being able to articulate a thought very clearly without necessarily conveying my futtering, stuttering mental thought processes as I'm trying to get something out there.
Yeah.
So, arguably, I feel like it's better than when we started, mm-hmm. right? But there were times when I felt like, for example, our first episode, I thought actually, even though I understand it was the first episode, and there could have been many issues there, and there were, sure.
It wasn't perfect?
It wasn't perfect? No, so pretty much. But I did feel very in line with my speaking then, mm-hmm. of course. But then there were things like, there were, how should I put this? Like, kind of like, when, for example, let's say when we had our first guest, mm-hmm. the way I wasn't very in line with my speaking. I wasn't congruent with past skill, mm-hmm. and of course I could have beaten myself up for that, but instead, what I decided to do was just kind of accept that, and that we're just, we're still doing the podcast. More skill will come as we keep doing it. Things along that line of thinking. And there were times when the speaking improved, and then there were times, again, where there was kind of this a little bit back on some episodes, in my opinion. Other people, maybe when they're observing it, they might not even be aware of it. Maybe they are,
and
maybe
just
not.
FYI, right? So studies do show that it actually makes you likely more likable.
What?
So remember we talked about, I think maybe we did. No, we had to have. So the thing is, so like if you're already viewed as being competent, let's say from even our podcast, right? They're like, well, these guys know a decent amount about flow, they're pretty bright guys, right? So then if you kind of stutter and mutter or whatever, fumble along the way, it's actually viewed as endearing. So that's so cool about like kind of what research shows is that, so let's say if somebody's initially viewed as competent, right? And they spill coffee on themselves, right? They're not going to be viewed as a klutz. They're actually going to be viewed as a human being to the people who are looking at them, right? Especially if they're like in kind of some higher position. So, or like whatever, not even, I may not say that, that kind of muddies it. So they're just viewed as competent, right? And so let's say they spill coffee on themselves, so then the people who are kind of around them think, wow, like, he's just like us, or he's just a human being. And so kind of off kind of camera, right, a lot of what we talk about is sort of how do we kind of expand our audience, right, and vulnerability, right? Because, I mean, that kind of unites us or links us to other people, which I really think is obviously the point of this show, right, and I'm sure you agree. So for us, right, the thing that makes us vulnerable, right, is the scary part, right, sort of revealing our weaknesses or revealing those flaws. But that's also the thing, right, especially sort of with this foundation of competence, which, I mean, I assume at least we've established at this point, right, based on the topics that we talked about. So there are people out there who are going to listen to this and hopefully say, hey, wow, no, I really like these guys because they remind me a lot of us. And sort of that's the problem with perfectionism. And that's the thing that I didn't see while I was chasing glory, in essence, right, becoming this, genius-like person, was that I would never actually be sort of connected to other human beings. And that's the thing that Faust actually learned. So in the book, he actually dies like this pretty lonely and miserable person, right, although a genius, obviously. But nobody can connect to him, right? So when it comes to kind of perfection, the thing that people, a lot of times, me, myself included, right, this is something that took me a while to get, that a lot of times what they don't understand is that perfect people are really intimidating, right, which means that obviously people won't want to be around them because, like, who wants to be around somebody who's perfect? That'll in turn make the other person feel inferior. And then on top of that, a lot of times they're not empathic. And you find that with a lot of, not everybody, but you find that with a lot of successful and intelligent people, right? So if they are narcissistic and they can't accept those flaws in themselves, they can't accept those flaws in other people. So then twice, right, you get two barriers. You have the being intimidating part, and then you have the other part, the non-empathy, right, that sort of keeps people away from you. And that's the thing that happens with a lot of geniuses, like Faust, right? A lot of people didn't want anything to do with him. And I actually had the same issue. So when I was, kind of in my perfectionistic stage, people didn't like me, right? So I would argue it's even possible that the two, that and narcissism, were conflated. That it was like, on the one hand, sometimes I was like, oh no, I'm not perfect, I need to get there. And then like 2 minutes later, I'm like, no, I am, I feel great about myself. And then so what unfortunately it did is it kept people away from me. And so like, I know we had that show about dating, and like, it's so cool how everything that we talked about kind of ties in together. And so a lot of what kept people away from me in dates, and this was another thing that I took me like forever to realize, was that I was super fucking intimidating, right? And it was like because I really tried to. So like when I would go on a date with a girl, literally what I would do was like a litany of my accomplishments. I'm like, oh, hey, by the way, I did this thing, I did that thing, oh yeah, I did this other thing. And then like the person is sitting there looking at me like, oh my God. And I'm like not processing this at all. And then like, of course, they want nothing to do with me. And then I'm like, I just don't understand, man. What is wrong with these people? Like, I'm just like this great, yeah. No, it's that bad.
Hey, I'm happy you were aware of that eventually.
Yeah, so, and it was like, for me, I didn't get it, right? So I was like, I don't understand. I'm just like, here's the thing, right? Because I was so insecure and because I was such a perfectionist. So look, and I'm not using this as an excuse, but this is why I did it. So it wasn't that, so I'm assuming the way the person felt was like, oh wow, like he's trying to show me that he's like, superior, like this great person. Actually, that wasn't what I was doing. I was just trying really, really fucking hard to impress the girl. So I was like, no, like please like me, like hear all of these different things that like they're good about me. So, but from her end, it was likely like, oh my God, he's such an asshole. He's making me feel like shit about myself. What?
So, you might like this, and I think probably somebody from the audience might appreciate this too.
Shoot.
When you're telling somebody your qualifications, and you even said that you were trying to impress, before you even said that, I immediately thought this thought.
Yeah.
So whenever you're telling someone your qualifications, in a way, okay, yeah,
Sure.
you're literally qualifying yourself, which means that you are in reaction to the person. Now, if that person hasn't done much or hasn't already said it that much yet, beyond the normal stuff like hi, what's up, all that, then if you are in reaction, then the person who is most reactive in the conversation tends to have the weaker... Let's use the word frame. Okay, that's a better word. I don't want to say reality.
Okay.
So I got that from a self-help area. But long story short...
The power of now? No, I'm kidding.
No,
I'm kidding.
definitely not that.
Okay.
But so if the person has a weaker frame, that doesn't help in the attraction game. I don't want to call it a game.
I hear
but
you.
You hear me. You got me. I mean, sorry. But whatchamacallit?
I definitely hear you.
Yeah.
I'm right here.
I didn't say understand you. I said I hear you. But yeah. So that's an interesting little thing on the side. But yeah, the fact that you were able to become aware of that is amazing. Actually,
fucking God.
Because think about the amount of people who would have been in your position who did not become aware of that and continued that behavior. Not just that. Think about, say they did eventually learn about the behavior. Think about maybe how much time maybe could have passed depending on the person.
Yeah.
That's insane. The fact that you got it at this point in your life is fantastic because I mean, I'm sure there's more to learn. That's goes without saying. But that's great because to be aware of yourself and how you're acting and the fact that you realize this at a young age is fantastic for the rest of your life, which is great. So if anyone's listening, is either around our age or even younger, or it doesn't even matter if you're older, it's fine. The thing is, it's just the earlier you learn this stuff, it's amazing the kind of consequences it has in your life, and then it kind of, I wouldn't say it compounds. I wouldn't say this is like an exponential thing. Not like that, quantifying like that, but I would definitely say that the longer that you're like this, you get way more benefits from it. That may not be the goal, or maybe that shouldn't be the goal. Should just be authentic, genuine, everything should be genuine. But as a symptom of that, it's just a tremendous amount of benefits you get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting because the article that I was telling you about earlier, the one on intimidation from Psych Today. So I think it's a recent article.
Oh, shared on You Seize the Moment.
Yeah. Really, really good art. If you ever get a chance, man, it's so good. So essentially what the author in it argues, so like what she does is she goes to these different points of like intimidation, right? So how people who are, let's say, formidable and physically strong, right, they're intimidating, right? People who are brilliant, right, and obviously intelligent, they're intimidating. Sometimes even people who are super shy can be intimidating, right, because they seem standoffish. And I was that person too, by the way, because I'm super shy, and that's like another part of me that I had to learn to accept, because like whatever, that maybe we'll talk about it a little later, but the point is that that's kind of in terms of the self-acceptance, sort of whatever growth, right, paradigm, right, the kind of shyness has become more along the lines of acceptance. But the point was that the author essentially argued, she said, look, as long as you're coming from the framework of having like really low self-esteem and a pretty shitty self-image, what's going to happen is you're going to try really hard to impress people, right? You're going to pretty much try to kind of pick yourself up and puff your chest. So the problem is that every single time you do that, obviously you're going to push people away from you, right? Because let's say even if, kind of appearance, right, is your thing, and then you kind of pretty much brag about how many people are attracted to you, you're going to do the same thing, right? The other person's going to be like, oh my God, like I have so much competition, I don't want anything to do with this person, right? Because I'm going to probably get rejected. So the author essentially says, look, if you don't base your self-esteem on something internal, right, rather than extrinsic, like looks, kind of success, even intellect can be sort of considered extrinsic, right? Because it's something that kind of fades, right? It's not something that you're fully in control of. It's not something that you can just say, oh, I can be intelligent today, right? It doesn't work that way. It's an extrinsic quality in the sense of it doesn't really belong to you then in the way that you can control it, right? Whereas
it changes constantly.
Yeah, and then it's not something that's determined by your actions, which is what she's saying. So she says that, like, look, essentially, if you base your self-esteem on, let's say, being a good person, right, sort of being morally forthright, right, or morally upright, rather, and if you kind of put yourself out there in terms of, let's say, you have a strong character, right, you're resilient, let's say you're brave, you're courageous, you deal with challenges in a very sort of, in a very kind of mature way, for lack of a better term, right? You can just say, look, this is the problem, right, and I'm going to try to figure out a way way to resolve it. You're going to do the right thing even when it's hard to do the right thing. You know, Bobby Kennedy once said that moral courage is essentially a rarer commodity than intelligence, right? So if you can do these things, right, that are always within your control, then you have a core sense of who you are. And unfortunately, I can't say that I'm there yet, right? But that is my goal, essentially, to say, like, look, to kind of reframe self-esteem in that direction, and to say that, look, I'm not good, or I'm not good enough, or whatever it is, because I'm intelligent, right? Because I'm, let's say, maybe attractive, let's say, you know, kind of in good shape, whatever it is, right? Not saying I agree or don't agree with any of these things, just saying external qualities. Right? But the point is that if I can go in it inside, right, and I could be, or I could come from an internal perspective of I'm just good enough, because essentially we're all good enough, right? In the sense of that, to some extent, we either are or we can be these particular things, right? We can be morally upright, we can be courageous, we can sort of show strength of character in difficult times. Then I won't need to obviously brag about it, you know, because I could say, like, oh no, like you're this thing too. You can be the same thing, right? So even though you might not, let's say, have a high enough IQ as, let's say, I don't know, Albert Einstein or Stephen Hawking, whomever, no, we're all the same in that respect, right? Because this is what really matters. And I mean, my hope is that I can get to that point, not saying I'm there, not blaming our culture, but it is kind of hard, obviously, to sort of say, no, this is why I feel good about myself. But the point is, the author that she was making was that, look, every time that you're pretty much intimidating, right? And she said, by the way, sometimes it's not your fault, right? Sometimes you can just be smart and you're like not trying to brag, or you're not projecting anything, not projecting, you're not sort of amplifying your accomplishments or even noting them. And the person is like, oh no, like, oh my God, he's or she's smarter than me. Now I want nothing to do with them. But just one more sec. So, but the point that the author was making is like, look, when it is in your control, she says, just like try to work on your self-esteem, right? Try to work on just knowing that it's on what Albert Ellis called unconditional self-regard that matters, right? Loving yourself no matter what, because of your sort of innate qualities, even though that's technically not what he said, but that's what she was saying. Mm-hmm.
Would you say that a symptom of self-acceptance would, of course, be, and this is theoretical, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but if you accept yourself, you're more likely to accept others.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because, by the way, because that's what it really is. So when I like really disdained people, and there really was a time, right? Because like, so for me, when I was a kid, like I was bullied, and like, so I really hated people, like a lot. So especially like when I was, you know, kind of a teenager. And so for me, it was really, I hated them because I hated myself, right? So all of the shit that I hated about myself, just tossed it right out. I was like, oh, I'm not in these things. You're all these things. You and you and you and you. So yeah, so it is that. So the thing is, it's like when, again, going back to that perfect person, right? So when you can at least consider yourself to be the perfect person and you don't believe you have flaws, you can't empathize with other people's flaws. So you can't say like, oh, well, you know what? I'm actually not as smart as I think I am. And therefore I can accept this person when they make a mistake or when they make a blunder in something or whatever it is, right? Some kind of like, you know, what do you call it? Faux pas or something.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
It's a faux pas, yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And then so, and it's the same thing with any other thing. Like when, let's say, I don't know, when we tell somebody that they haven't tried hard enough, right? And it's really only because you haven't experienced that, or at least believe that you haven't experienced that. It's like, oh, why didn't you get an A? You should have gotten that instead of whatever it was, a B or a B plus, right? But then it's like, hello, what about all of the grades, the, you know, crappy grades in your mind that you got, right? What about the times when you didn't sort of perform up to standard? But the point is, because we suppress a lot of these ideas or a lot of these memories, we're like, no, it's not me, it's you. Like, I'm great the way I am. I'm super smart and I'm super conscientious. You're the one who's not doing the right thing. But it's like when you accept yourself, again, this is hard, right? But when you at least kind of start to try to accept yourself as you are, what happens is it's much easier for you to accept the mistakes and the flaws of other people. And again, this is within limits because some people really are just super shitty. There's no question about that. Where they're like, you just got to set boundaries with them. But then for the most part, if I had to guess, 75 to 80% of people are pretty decent human beings.
Out of curiosity, would you say if somebody was either meditating or practicing mindfulness, in the moments that they are engaged in the moment or are paying attention without thinking, also known as present to the moment, whatever words you want to use, would you say that because you are actually in the moment, at that point in time, you are in acceptance of yourself? Because it's not necessarily it's not like a mental... Would you say that you necessarily have to have a mental understanding that I accept myself, like you said that internally, and then all of a sudden, and then you try to feel it? Or would you say that in practice, it's kind of, since there wouldn't be that internal dialogue, because you're in the moment, would you argue that you're being not most yourself, but you're being your self or accepting yourself by not engaging in the self-dialogue by being present to the moment?
Or maybe, just to kind of conceptualize it a bit differently, maybe it's neither. Maybe it's just you just shutting it off completely and not deciding or having to decide whether you should or shouldn't accept yourself. It's just being.
Right. But then if you are being, you can argue that you're accepting...
Oh, things
I'm getting really esoteric.
And this is like
You're
very...
accepting
Yeah.
what is.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I agree with you.
Right.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, so that's technically acceptance.
Okay.
And then... Would you say... Okay, this is interesting because say anytime that mental dialogue comes up, the times that it comes to you, let's say automatically, by practicing being in the moment / meditating / mindfulness practice, whatever, you would be kind of gaining momentum into being more your... more of the self that accepts yourself.
I mean,
wow.
I guess if you're looking at it from the standpoint of you're just being and not judging yourself, then yeah, I could see how that could be viewed as self-acceptance.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that's good. Just wanted to throw that out there, just as like a kind of a thought experiment.
Yeah, because technically, from the way you from the way you describe it, and also what the kind of actual term of mindfulness is, I mean, it technically is just a being and sort of like allowing thoughts, allowing just the world, allowing even yourself to be without judgment. So if that's the case, then yeah, I think it could be viewed as self-acceptance.
Okay. So that could help someone.
Yeah.
In case they're attempting to. Become more self-aware.
Yeah.
Because one thing about
and self-accepting. Yeah.
And right.
Yeah.
Because the person you use as an example someone who's a genius,
right,
who may not even be aware of the effect that they're having on someone. So then I would of course say to that, okay, then the remedy to that would be to become more self-aware. But then that's easier said than done, which is kind of why before even having said that, that's why I brought up the meditation thing, because at least that's a good preface to
both words are fine.
To whatchamacallit, to trying to become self-aware, because the thing is, I noticed some people are so in such a momentum with their thoughts and beliefs and actions that they may not actually take time to have to kind of become a little more introspective for a bit and take a look at what it is they're thinking, kind of watch what they're thinking. So I realized that something like meditation or mindfulness practices, and then there's other things as well, TM. I just I don't know too much about TM, but I've heard people like Arnold Schwarzenegger espouse how great it is. I just haven't checked it out. Maybe one day, but that could be a resource. Just trying to throw it out for the audience, if anything.
Right.
What would you say is maybe something someone can do to become a little more self-aware? So this way they could then get into attempting to accept themselves where they're at. Because the thing is, I'm sure a lot of people can easily identify with trying to be in a growth phase. Actually, I'm sure there's going to be people who are not identifying with that as well. But then also may identify with the self-acceptance side of it. But yeah, I think what we should try to say is how to maybe attempt to accept yourself.
Well, do you mean the good and the bad?
Yes.
Oof. So, but here's also going to be the question, right? Which is why I think it's such a big distinction. It's such a tough distinction. How do you realize, or how do you kind of acknowledge what you should and shouldn't accept, right?
Maybe we actually said something before on one of our other podcasts about writing down. Okay, this is in relation to finding your purpose. Oh, this is the last podcast. Haha. Okay, so
episode 19.
Episode 19. So yeah. Writing down what your values are, do you think that could help?
Yes, that's big. That's actually really big in all of this, yeah.
Yeah, so if someone... Alright, so say someone tried to be self-aware, they said what their values are, so they're aware of their values. I suppose they try to live in alignment as best as they can with their values. while not judging themselves, therefore not judging others. Well, that's not therefore. That's not the point of the podcast. But that might be a symptom of it. If they accept themselves, they might not. They would accept others. What else do you think somebody could do to try to accept themselves?
Well, so, I mean, we have this phrase, and I think I've mentioned this before in, like, therapy, right? So, self-disclosure begets self-disclosure. So, look, a lot of it is actually being vulnerable and just being open with other people. So, the best way for us to accept ourselves is literally through others. So, if you can allow yourself to be vulnerable and say, hey, look, these are kind of my weaknesses and my flaws, right? Depending on what they are, right? Because obviously, if you're a murderer, I mean, nobody's going to like you. That's just kind of a thing in our sort of...
What about another murderer?
Well, yeah, I would argue that...
Is that a positive reframe? No, just kidding.
Right, so this all has limits, obviously, but the point is, for the most part, we're not as terrible as we think we are. So if you allow yourself to be more vulnerable with other people, you find that, like, they're like, oh, wow, like, no, these are things that like you did, right? When I was like, hey, here are the things that I struggle with, and you're like, oh my god, I struggle with these things too, right? So essentially, by, like, two people accepting one another's struggles because they are their own, again, they're not perfect. I empathize with you because literally I understand what you went through. So that is a great way to accept yourself, by having another person show you that it might be normal. I mean, not necessarily normal, but it's something that at least other people experience, or it could be normal if they say, hey, by the way, no, I know these other guys that have gone through the same thing. But just to answer your question, but the point is that, like, when you have two people, right, who are sort of in union in that way, where they can kind of, let's say, I don't know, conjoin and say, oh my god, like, we've been through these things together, we've made all of these mistakes, and they're so similar, and it's so crazy, I can't believe it, I never told anybody about this, I didn't think anybody would understand. So that is a great way for self-acceptance, and I really think that that's for the most part the point of therapy. So, like, where people come and they share these sort of really, what to them are not that bad, these things about themselves that are so seemingly terrible, and their therapist goes, yeah, I've even done that. Like, and they're like, what? Right, and through that, like, they kind of learn that they're, whatever their sort of flaws are, and I really use this term loosely, right? I just use it to distinguish, well, like, what people see in their minds, right, in terms of strengths and weaknesses. I'm not even saying they are flaws, because hypothetically speaking, they may not be, right? Depends on who you're asking. But the point is that when it comes to these flaws, if you can reveal them, if you have the courage to reveal them to another person, and the other person says, yeah, okay, I mean, I either went through this, or that doesn't sound so bad, essentially you can learn to accept yourself through it.
Okay, so two aha moments from that. One is, yes, through disclosing what you feel to someone else, and then actually realizing that they can relate to you, and having that kind of feedback that could actually open you up, make you, you would be vulnerable with that person, and in that sense, by getting all that stuff out and seeing this is a common thing, you would be able to accept yourself. Okay.
Yep.
Then second aha moment is therapy, actually, which is fantastic for anyone who feels like they wouldn't be able to, they feel, at least in their mind, they feel like they wouldn't be able to disclose it to anyone close to them.
Right.
Or potentially anyone new because they're new, maybe. Yeah. I'm just speculating. Now, what would you say to the person who doesn't have access to therapy and has trouble being vulnerable to with other people?
Ooh, another episode we're going back to. The one with Steph, right? What do we talk about in terms of empathy? Read books. Ask yourself, are there other people who have been through these experiences? Can I find books that relate to those other people with these similar experiences? So little by little, as you see that other people have gone through your, let's say, whatever they were. Obviously, but for different people, they're different. But the point is that, like, from books, right? And that's why I really, really love that episode. By the way, guys, check that one out with Steph Kent. I thought she was a really wonderful guest. And so what's so cool about books is that they literally help you not only empathize with other people, which was obviously one of the main points that we talked about, but also learn to accept yourself, because you're like, oh my God. So James Baldwin, right? He once said something along the lines of, right, you think your suffering is your own until you read, literally, and then you're like, oh my God, these other people suffer, and then it's like you realize that your suffering is not only your own, but it's sort of spread amongst a plethora of people, that there's so many people that have your particular struggle. And so the point is, as you kind of go through these different pieces of literature, you realize that there are other people who are just like you, and if they can somehow find a way to love and accept themselves, so can you.
And so so first of all, that's brilliant, but then say there's no book, no book. Say,
there's books on everything.
Yeah.
Go online.
say they don't have access or they don't want to read. Let's say it's not a reader.
Pick up a book.
Would
right?
you? I hear you. I hear you. We encourage you to read.
Please read.
Yeah, but
Anything.
But say that's not something that they're interested in.
Yep.
Would you say podcast?
Yeah, of course.
Just in general, YouTube videos.
Yeah.
Maybe you
documentaries,
never know, maybe or even a movie.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's great. Okay, so that works. I'm just trying to tackle it from all possible.
Oh, and by the way,
scenarios.
and also support groups. So like you can go on a meetup group for virtually anything. Meetup group for people with social anxiety. Sometimes people meetup groups like with struggle. Yeah.
A meetup group for people
Oh, it
with social
works!
anxiety.
Oh my god. So first of all, so one of my clients, who I kid you not, was one of the most socially anxious people I've ever met in my entire life ever. So this person, right? So
I'm listening. No,
yeah,
don't mind me.
so he goes to like this party, right? Like on one of these big holidays, right? And in the party, right? So there's him and there's this other girl. He literally approaches her and says something along the lines of like, "Hey, this party really sucks." She's like, "Yeah, no, this party really does suck." They've been together ever since. I was like, "How did you do it?" He's like, "I don't know, I just did it," and it was like wonderful.
This was a social anxiety.
Yeah, but it was a social anxiety meetup, and he had one of the most severe forms of social anxiety I've ever seen. Like, he puts my social anxiety to shame when I talk about being shy. Like, he was just on a whole other level. Like, he just no eye contact, literally just didn't know what to say ever, freezes up, or used to freeze up all the time. He literally approached this girl. I was like, yo, that's amazing, and they've been together since. So wild. So,
do you think it's because it was a social anxiety group? In his mind, he's thinking, "Oh, okay, I definitely know this other person has social anxiety. Therefore, it feels safe."
Yes.
That's fascinating.
And it had to have been it. I'm not saying that's not what he told me, by the way. Just FYI. But my
if
assumption.
you had to speculate.
Yeah, if I had to speculate, yeah. Because like the thing is, like, when I meet people, like I'm more comfortable actually around shy people than I am around super confident people. So because I am that, and so when I'm around this person who's obviously at least to some respect shy, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. This is a person I can like get along with, and they're sort of genuine to me. Whereas the other person, I'm like, oh, no, I don't want anything to do with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Just trying to see if there's any other angles to tackle this from. Only because I'm just trying to think about the person who might be watching it. Just trying to not hit every one of the excuses. It's not an excuse type of thing. Just kind of like I don't know. Do you feel like we're missing anything exactly, or?
Well, in terms of the show altogether.
Yeah.
I guess in terms of the topic of what to change, right? So, I mean, we talked about self-acceptance. And so there are definitely still parts of us that we do need to sort of grow out of and parts of us that we need to change. So, like, sometimes, again, I'm just going to go back to me because obviously it's the easiest sort of example. So, for me, it's kind of hard to figure out, like, what is it that I'm capable of changing and what I should change. So, obviously, that was one example, right? Sort of not kind of listing off my resume on the first date, right? So, but then also, like, being kind of shitty to people or closing people off or even, let's say, really just being more mindful, obviously, about the things, or rather about the way your behavior affects people. I think that's really important. So when it comes to sort of change, right, here's the kind of tricky part, though. So, but this is, I'm going to qualify this by saying this is sort of across the board and on average. So technically speaking, when it comes to personalities, like when it comes to the big 5 traits, right, sort of neuroticism, agreeableness, openness, I forget the rest of them. Crap. So whatever it is, it's like neuroticism, agreeableness.
I forget assertiveness.
No, it's not. No, it's not assertiveness.
I used to know the
Wait,
big 5.
no,
Wow.
I'm gonna now. I have to because
right.
I feel like an asshole. Hold on,
Nah,
and I can pull
okay.
this up in like 2 seconds. So okay, here we go. Boom.
Oh, I actually thought you had it right away.
No, not okay. Here it is. I actually kind of do. Okay, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. There it is. So, what kind of research finds is that unfortunately, on average, for the most part, like even though people's personalities change in adulthood, they actually don't do so very much. So, like they slightly change, which is obviously kind of shitty. But then also the beauty is that when you come to therapeutic studies, then like let's say with different personality disorders, fortunately, right, when it comes to like the effective treatments, right, scientific validated ones, CBT, DBT, transference focused psychotherapy, right? Sort of these ones that deal with the difficult personality disorders, what you find is that essentially that they're gone, right? So that these people no longer meet the criteria for them. So what's so cool is that even though the general studies show that like on average most people don't change, when it comes to therapy, they actually do. And like, haha, yeah, I'm selling therapy now. But I mean, fortunately it does work.
It's not like you're telling everyone who's watching to go to your...
Yeah. So just go to therapy.
Even if you were, that's fine too. you should, if you're providing some kind of service, get paid. It's not like a crazy. For example, in the spiritual community, for instance, there are some teachers. I feel bad for doing that, but there are teachers who will kind of disdain materialism.
Right.
And I'm not in agreement with that, because you kind of still live in a world that requires you to not just survive, kind of, if you want to
enjoy it.
If you want to enjoy it, you'd have to thrive in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then what would you be doing if you wanted to do the best you could possibly in that way, or the best you could up to the what kind of problems you'd be willing to deal with.
Well, so my middle ground is going to be just go to therapy, guys. Anyway, just see any therapist. So, but the good thing is about the studies that when it comes to therapy is that they actually show that people do really substantially or can substantially change. So when it comes to sort of acceptance, right, like, oh, so here it is for me, right, from my end. And I think I want to know your kind of perspective too from you, right? So for me, I've decided that I'm going to just accept like social anxiety and being shy. I don't care anymore. I've tried to deal with this thing for years. It literally has gone nowhere. So although obviously I'm much more likely these days to attend events that I wouldn't have otherwise, I'm still like a mess, especially the first time around. I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing or saying. And sometimes I completely shut down, and sometimes like, oh, I talked to one person today. Cool, I'm done. Like, I could go home. So I'm accepting that. I don't care. It doesn't affect anybody. And it's like, for me, it just doesn't. And no matter what I've tried for it, all of the exposure, done nothing. So, but when it comes to change, right, the things that I'm going to change is like that. Like sort of a trying at least. I'm going to say try, I'm not going to say I will. So that's because that's hard. So, but just kind of like on the date, or when I meet somebody, not just to list off a whole litany of my accomplishments. I'm going to try my best not to do, even when a person asks, because that's when it's tempting, like, oh, like, what have you like done, or what are you proud of, or what do you do for a living? And I'm like, oh, now that you want to know this, here are all of my qualifications. So I'm going to try my best to limit them, obviously. So those are the things that I'm going to change, right? The things that sort of sabotage me in terms of my own happiness, like obviously dating, and then also the things that hurt other people. Like obviously when I do say something, I don't know, and it's pretty senseless, like if somebody's going through a hard time and I'm just like, oh, here's this thing that I'm really happy about, right? I'm going to try my best not to do that. But what about like for you? Like if you had to think of the things that you had to accept, right? The qualities that where you're like, you know what? It's either they don't affect me that much and I don't really care enough to try to change them, or I've really tried hard and it's not working. And then like, what are those things, and what are the things that you're like, no, like I have to still try to work on getting better?
Okay, so once upon a time when I was attempting to learn more social skills so that I can one, have more success in relationships, but also kind of just have more success in life in general, and meet more people, and also people who are considered quote unquote high status and all that. And the thing is, when I started that out, one thing I would do is I would just kind of try to highlight my own behaviors, or try to appear entertaining, or be entertaining, be funny, all that kind of stuff. Try to just convey personality traits that could seem very interesting to someone.
Right.
But one thing I didn't realize was that I was focused too much on me, and not enough focused on them. I did, of course, if you asked me, of course I cared about the other person. It's not like I did this on purpose. It's just a kind of learned behavior. I didn't know that I was doing this.
Yeah.
But apparently, I wouldn't put my concerns on the other person. I would talk too much about what's going on with me, even if it's to be entertaining, to make them happy.
Right.
On one level, I can see how I'm caring about their happiness in that sense, but it's not like I was asking, how are you? How was your day? I understand these are very cliche.
It's kind of more
questions.
about being liked.
It was coming from that sort of. It seemed to be coming from that place.
Yeah.
Then when I realized this, I actually just made more of an effort to try to ask, how is someone doing, and not just ask, but of course mean it and be genuine about it.
As details.
Of course. And then the thing is, as soon as I realized that I wasn't making it about them or about the other person, that was actually enough for me to ask genuinely how they're doing. Because, again, I did care how people were. I just didn't understand what I was doing. I had a blind spot to this. I didn't see that I was not focusing enough on the other person's concerns. and that's one thing. What's other behaviors? Oh, okay. Yeah, when I used to get... Oh, I never told you this. I used to have crippling anxiety. Like, when I was on the train, let's say going to, let's say, school, like Hunter College, I would have... I had to sit, like... I'm sitting straight, right? Let's say I got a seat on the train. This is New York City. And there's people to the right of me and to the left of me. I couldn't even turn to the right or left without feeling like some kind of strain. Like, do you see my kind of muscles kind of tensing up? I couldn't even do it without a muscle tensing up. And I just couldn't look at other people. And if I did twitch, something like that, it was bad.
But we can laugh at it now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. And plus I'm talking about my own thing. So I think that's fine, right? Yeah, no, of course, I don't... If somebody's experiencing that, no, respect and complete empathy, because I have experienced that. And, so, I would have stuff like that, and then, and this is weird. After reading The Power of Now, and I understand I always reference The Power of Now specifically. I hear you. It's just the easiest go-to out of all the material, because it's just...
it's there.
Thank you. It's there.
It's in the noggin.
There's other ones too, but whatever.
I know.
Long story short, and I did have an epiphany after reading it, and I was completely fine. I actually had great, amazing social skill for a little while. What ended up happening is, okay, long story short, I'm not going to get into all the details of it. There's actually a whole story here. So just to make it very short, for some reason I had regressed to a point when I felt social anxiety again. The reason can be talked about later on a different podcast, because it's a whole different thing to open up. But I had to give up on the fact that I was having social anxiety. And I understood intellectually acceptance. I understood intellectually don't resist the moment. I understood intellectually this is an illusion. Like whatever I was experiencing, and for whatever reason I'm thinking I need to react. I understood that the person next to me is just like me intellectually, but I wasn't feeling it.
That intuition, man.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's weird. As far as the mental dialogue was going, everything seemed to be on point as far as realizing what's going on there in terms of self-awareness. But the only time when I had switched from from being so tense and twitchy was when I said, okay, I can't do anything about this anymore. Like that's it, I give up. And actually I was really frustrated at the time. I think no, I don't want to fabricate a memory. I wanted to say something just now, but I might have added something that maybe is not real, so I don't want to do that. But yeah, it was it was really bad. It was really bad. And it was to a point of like, okay, I don't care anymore. And then once I got there, slowly what I was doing started to kind of unravel. Not unravel. It started to collapse, these behaviors. And then eventually I got out of it. So yeah, that was my experience with like two different things. There are other things as well. It just nothing comes to mind.
Or what would you change? Or what would you still work on sort of improving?
Right now?
Yeah, like in terms of your behaviors. It's a tough one.
Well, no, it's not. No. I'm sure. No, there's a bunch. In terms of my behaviors. Okay, in terms of like, right. So, for instance, we've talked before. You've even offered for me to write a blog for you on the Leon's Existential Cafe, and I even said yes. And when was this that I said yes?
You know how many people? It's all good, by the way, because I've had at least a handful of people tell me yes and never did anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, and I actually don't like that for just to put that on the record, because it's like kind of like there's this thing that you said you would try to do, but you haven't done it yet, and this is the point where either I could beat myself up for it, or I could accept it and attempt to build some kind of momentum towards writing.
Right.
So that's, for example, one thing that I could definitely improve on, but simultaneously I accept, because if I didn't, it would just, again, add too much mental baggage.
Right.
What else? Let's see. Well, maybe learning more, learning editing techniques as far as how to edit this post-production, or certain things about sound quality. For example, when we have a guest. For example, the last guest we had, amazing. I love the guest. Thing is, I just there was an echo when he was speaking in our version of the audio. There is a better version of the audio. We did include a link to that in the description of our last video. It's at the very top of the description. But even so, the original video had the echo, and it's not even a perfectionist thing. I just, as far as, you want to put out if you're going to put something out, you want it to be to the best of your ability.
That's perfectionism.
What's the best of your ability? Okay. Knowing that your ability is not perfect.
Well, we technically did. We did the best that we could.
Ah, okay.
We did. We tried our best, and we did the best that we could.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, I'll say this. Since other ones that we didn't have an echo, you would just... Ideally, you don't want to have the echo.
I hear you.
That's the main point.
I mean, and we could get around that in the future. I think that there's some strategies.
That's the thing. Yeah, but also... and it's been verbalized, right? Mm-hmm. But then there's a point when action needs to be more action needs to be taken. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you, with the momentum of this is really behind the scenes stuff, with the momentum of work and other things, and just also wanting just to rest. Mm-hmm. For instance, if I had gotten back, normally I would have gone to I don't want to even say it because of how much resistance there is to it. Like, I know you don't like how much I bring up, but I wanted to go
to the gym.
Yes.
Is that where you're going?
I want to go.
Let's talk about your workout.
Okay, so I wanted to go. Normally, I would go to the gym. I would come back. Maybe it's 8:00, 8:30. Right. At that point, I just want to rest, and it's not that much time till I would have to go to sleep to get an adequate amount of sleep before the next work day.
Right.
And with the amount of time there, it's not that there's no free time. Mm-hmm. It's just that I need to build momentum in terms of carving out time.
I hear you.
To do things that would benefit not just the podcast, other things in life in general too.
Yeah.
And that's something to simultaneously accept and work on. Now, here's the thing. What's good about it is... because I accept it, I don't think I'm just saying that I accept it just to sound like I accepted it.
Gotcha.
Here and there, I'll think about it. So you can argue that would be resistance. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. But I'll say this. By accepting it, I'm sure that there will come a point, because I kind of have this pattern about me, where when I see what I'm doing, but I don't add resistance to it, but I tend to take these little baby steps towards completing the action. It does take a long time, which are from a productivity standpoint, in terms of let's get this done, it's not good. But in terms of creating change and lasting change, it does work. Like these baby steps towards kind of building momentum towards doing these things that you know you're supposed to, but you should accept that you're not doing, because you would just, again, add more baggage.
I hear you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we have pretty much come to the end of the road.
Oh, cool.
Episode, 20?
I know.
Damn, crazy, man. What?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Guys, follow us everywhere, seriously.
Follow us everywhere, anywhere where you could find podcasts.
Yeah.
Mainly on Apple and Google Play.
Oh, and if you guys can, please write us a review. So we really read all of them whenever we get the chance. Technically, we don't have that many, but we will read all of them, and it would really mean a lot to us, because it would get us up higher, obviously, in the news and noteworthy section. And then obviously, kind of for us, that'd be pretty cool, because we'll get to expand our audience. And if we get to expand our audience, who knows, maybe we'll be able to improve the quality of the show. That'd be interesting.
That 100%.
Yeah.
Actually, we're looking into one day getting a Patreon and maybe getting more money for better equipment and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that's a different story. We'll hear more about that as time goes on. But yeah, if you want to follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram, and at Seize_podcast on Twitter.
Yep.
Remember to subscribe.
Hit the bell.
Hit the bell.
Mm-hmm. And leave a comment.
Leave a comment.
Yeah.
Tell us what you think. Tell us about your journey with self-acceptance and simultaneously growth and self-development. And yeah, look forward to the next podcast.
I'll see you in 21.